homeland. Under false claims of ethnic solidarity, has invalidated neighboring nations. Putin has the gall to say he's denazifying Ukraine. It's a lie. Putin has the gall to say he's denazifying Ukraine. It's a lie. It's just cynical. He knows that. And it's also obscene. President Zelensky was democratically elected. He's Jewish. His father's family was wiped out in the Nazi Holocaust. And Putin has the audacity, like all our autocrats before him, to believe that might will make right. There's simply no justification or provocation for Russia's choice of war. It's an example of one of the oldest human impulses, using brute force and disinformation to satisfy a craving for absolute power and control. It's nothing less than a direct challenge to the rule-based international order established since the end of World War II. Vladimir Putin's aggression have cut you, the Russian people, off from the rest of the world. And it's taking Russia back to the 19th century. This is not who you are. This is not the future you deserve for your families and your children. I'm telling you the truth. This war is not worthy of you, the Russian people. Putin can and must end this war. The American people will stand with you and the brave citizens of Ukraine who want peace. Don't even think about moving on one single inch of NATO territory. We have sacred obligation. We have a sacred obligation under Article 5 to defend each and every inch of NATO territory with the full force of our collective power. Be not afraid. A dictator bent on rebuilding an empire will never erase a people's love for liberty. Brutality will never grind down their will to be free. Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia, for free people refused to live in a world of hopelessness and darkness. We will have a different future, a brighter future, rooted in democracy and principles, hope and light, of decency and dignity, of freedom and possibilities. For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
Hi guys, this is Tommy with Tommy Nation Politics. Free-thinking, innovative, totally open-minded, new independent progressive media. Shout outs to some friends of mine in the Progressive Rising discussion. Y'all told me about that clip. I was at work all today, but guys, there's some familiarities going on with exactly what the rhetoric is saying and the propaganda that's rising to insurmountable heights. I just want to take you guys on a little memory lane tour. This is not the mainstream media, so I'm not trying to get you to think any kind of thing, guys, but I do want to convey this emotion that I have. It's called a rerun emotion. And I want to take you guys back to September 2001, if I can. And I want you to hear the rhetoric back then as well. But first, guys.
Simply stated, there is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction.
Saddam Hussein and his regime are concealing their efforts to produce more weapons of mass destruction.
We can't let the world's worst leaders blackmail, threaten, hold freedom-loving nations hostage with the world's worst weapons.
And the country is very much on the brink of war tonight, a war that will touch hundreds of thousands of American families.
Saddam Hussein and his regime will stop at nothing until something stops him.
Now something like 250,000 Allied troops in the region, and we're told they're ready. The question on everyone's mind tonight, when would a war start?
My fellow citizens, events in Iraq have now reached the final days of decision. Saddam Hussein and his sons must leave Iraq within 48 hours. Their refusal to do so will result in military conflict. My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. We will tear down the apparatus of terror, and we will help you to build a new Iraq that is prosperous and free. The tyrant will soon be gone. The day of your liberation is near.
So nearly 3 weeks after this war began, US forces are now coming into the center of Baghdad. This is what regime change looks like. The Stars and Stripes have come to town. Saddam Hussein's reign of terror is over.
The administration also cautioned it's not over yet, and more people will die.
As for Saddam Hussein,
Hey guys, this is Tommy with Tommy Nation Politics. How's everyone doing today? Tommy Nation Politics.
On Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm John Kiriakou, here in the studio with my co-host Michelle Whitty. State Department spokesman Ned Price yesterday said that the United States supports Ukrainian efforts to secure a peace agreement with Russia so long as that agreement, quote, does not compromise the core principles at the heart of the Kremlin's war against Ukraine, unquote. He reiterated U.S. support for Ukraine and for a negotiated settlement, but then added that President Putin is apparently not ready to stop the war. In the meantime, President Biden, in a speech to a U.S. business roundtable, said that the United States seeks a new world order. He used those words. And Russia announced that it would withdraw from the World Trade Organization. We're joined here in the studio by Tony Alexiou. He's a principal at the Minotaur Group, a Washington, D.C. consulting firm that specializes in geopolitical risk and homeland security consultancy. Welcome, Tony.
Thanks, John. Thanks very much for having me.
Tony, much of what takes place in wartime is strategizing. We see that strategizing in language, for example, coming out of the White House and the State Department. We had President Biden yesterday calling for this new world order, using that specific terminology. And we had Ned Price saying that Ukraine and the West want peace, but the Russians don't want peace. To me, that sounds like language meant to prepare the American people for a policy of regime change. What do you think of that? What are your thoughts on what the U.S. strategy is here?
Well, the U.S., has always, since the end of the Second World War, has been kind of one of the top dogs in the world. Always has been historically, and even I wouldn't say too much before that, because it was Britain that was really kind of the top dog before the Second World War kicked in. The whole notion of regime change, I don't agree with that, to be honest with you. It's not, and the U.S. has done that in other parts of the world, and so has other countries for that matter. But, Russia is not Panama. It's not Grenada. They're not going to roll inside and the people are going to be like, yay, America's here. No, they're presumably going to fight back. I would fully expect they would. So, having, SEAL Team 6 roll in, for example, into Moscow and arrest Putin or whatever, that will never, ever. If it happens, I'm resigning my job and closing my company. It will never, ever happen. So that notion doesn't exist. What could I suppose, if you really want to explore the notion of regime change, I suppose the U.S. could find people within the inner circles of Russian politics and have them do like a palace coup, which that can happen in any country in the world for that matter, and there have been, since the start of the war in the Ukraine, there have been a couple of rumors that have been floating around about that. There was, a couple weeks ago, I read that, was the Russian Defense Minister, Shoigu, I believe his name is, he was going to take out Putin and
So many rumors, guys. So many rumors, and yet one thing is for sure. We have Joe Biden, the guy who confronted Corn Pop at the swimming pool, the guy who confronted Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction, says Putin cannot remain in power. Warsaw, Poland, CNN Politics. Also corresponding with Reuters, Washington. Republican, oh, by the way, U.S. Representative Jeff Fortenberry. He's now convicted. He was lying to the FBI, guys. Lying to FBI investigators, guys. We've got Durham. We've got Sussman, and we've got Fortenberry, Republican representative. He's now awaiting his sentencing for falsifying facts and concealing materials, along with 2 counts of making false statements to federal investigators. Isn't that interesting, guys? It's almost like these little games the Republicans and Democrats play where they're fucking forking around steel dossiers and fucking putting all kinds of fucking shit up people's pants and stealing classified documents and blaming it on their aides. It's almost like this stuff is leading to the unhappiness and the unprosperity of our country, guys. It appears also this guy, Fortenberry, had $30,000 from other foreign countries. We didn't give foreign aid to all these countries in our COVID relief bill for some reason, but federal law prohibits foreign nationals from donating to federal election campaigns, guys. It's a big no-no. You should have married a Melanian, funneled it that way. Fortenberry, 61, has served in Congress since 2005. The 3 felony charges each carry a maximum penalty of 5 years in prison. I wonder if that's going to work out for Sussman. I'm pretty sure that he's probably going to try to plead the 5th, and he was the Clinton lawyer, so he should get off. I mean, Neera Tanden, she almost got a budget seat right next to Bernie Sanders. We'll be talking about Bernie Sanders in a second, guys. But President Vladimir Putin, guys, he should no longer remain in power, says an unabashed Joe Biden. And by the way, those remarks were not prepared in his speech, which was written for him by Wall Street, the banks, and the military-industrial complex. But CNN did turn it around to make it say, quote, he's trying to reinforce Western unity. Joe Biden, quote, for God's sake, this man can't remain in power, fat. Biden announced at the conclusion of a capstone address delivered in the cold outside Royal Castle in Warsaw. My God, what a symbol of democracy Joe Biden is. What a brave, brave man who stands in the way of all kinds of evil. Joseph Elizabeth Biden, a hero to all. Or warmonger to all, I should say. Hero to some. Neocon to me. Watch this, guys. This is fun.
The costs of the Iraq War were enormous. More than 4,500 American soldiers, as well as thousands of military contractors, were killed. Tens of thousands of U.S. soldiers were wounded. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqis, and by some estimates, more than 1 million were killed. And the war created massive instability, including more wars and terrorism throughout the Middle East and North Africa. Fast forward to the 2020 presidential race. There's only one candidate for the nomination of the Democratic Party who played a leading role in actually making the Iraq War happen.
In my judgment, President Bush is right to be concerned about Saddam Hussein's relentless pursuit of weapons of mass destruction and the possibility that he may use them or share them with terrorists. Other regimes hostile to the United States and our allies already have or seek to acquire weapons of mass destruction.
This was Joe Biden. In 2002, speaking as chair of the United States Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. A few months later, when the Senate was debating whether to give President George W. Bush the authority to start a war with Iraq, Biden argued strongly in favor of granting this authority.
The objective is to compel Iraq to destroy its illegal weapons of mass destruction and its programs to develop and produce missiles and more of those weapons. Saddam is dangerous. The world would be a better place without him. But the reason he poses a growing danger to the United States and its allies is that he possesses chemical and biological weapons and is seeking nuclear weapons. And unlike my colleague from West Virginia and Maryland, I do not believe this is a rush to war. I believe it's a march to peace and security. I believe that failure to overwhelmingly support this resolution is likely to enhance the prospects that war will occur.
Joe Biden did so much more than vote for the war. He was the chair of the powerful Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, and he really used his control over that committee to make sure that a majority of the U.S. Senate voted to authorize the war. And that's a very serious thing.
Historian Barbara Ransby.
It's questionable whether the authorization to start the war could have even passed Congress without all that Biden did to get it approved. So he really did play a major role in bringing us into the Iraq War, a terrible, terrible war. And this was much more responsibility. He bears much more responsibility than many other senators who simply voted for it. Of course, the statement about chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons were false. And many experts already concluded this at the time of the Senate hearings, but Biden didn't allow these experts to testify. That's really significant. As chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, Biden was able to control the Senate debate on the war, and therefore much of the information that most senators received and that major media outlets reported was really distorted.
There were other Democrats in the Senate who wanted to put limits on Bush's ability to start a war in Iraq. For example, if there was no imminent threat to the United States and the United Nations did not authorize a war, then President Bush would have to come back to Congress for another resolution. But Biden shot this down.
So the reason why I oppose the amendment of my friend from Michigan is because the basic premise upon which I began is consistent with where my friend from Connecticut begins, and that is that the threat need not be imminent for us to take action. That's authority we're about to delegate to the president.
So the fact that he would take such a stridently pro-war position, that he would use that role to limit the debate the way he did, played a major factor in getting enough defections from the Democratic majority to join with almost unanimous Republican support to make the war resolution pass.
Professor Stephen Zunes.
As a result, I don't think it would be unfair to say that Biden played a more important role than probably anybody in Congress in making the Iraq War possible. The idea that Iraq, which had been rid of its non-conventional weapons and weapons programs and weapon systems, that was under the strictest sanctions of any nation has ever experienced, was somehow a threat to the United States and the far side of the world is totally absurd. I mean, totally ridiculous. I mean, the fact that an educated person like Joe Biden with foreign policy experience would believe that really defies the imagination.
It defies the imagination, guys. It need not be an imminent threat. That's what Joe Biden said about that resolution. That's what he said about extending the Patriot Act and renewing it during the Obama administration. It's what he's further said as he ramps up his wonderful warmongering regime change rhetoric at Warsaw. Yes, guys, we're back. Back to calling for regime change. Russia's government. Reflecting on the significant escalation of his rhetoric, Moscow officials said that removing Putin from power was, quote, not their goal. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov responded to Biden saying, quote, this is not to be decided by Mr. Biden. It should only be a choice of the people of the Russian Federation. Well, I'll be damned. First NATO tells us to sit down and shut the fuck up, and now Russia does. Could it be these CIA talking points in the regime change wars that are so blatantly echoed again and again? Here we are back to chemical weapons. Are they going to do chemical weapons? It's the same playbook, guys. The same playbook over and over again. We heard that there was this thing. Then we give a good guy and a bad guy. Then we spread our propaganda all over the place. The crazy part is that for some reason the liberals are believing the CIA. I guess it's because Comey or the Mueller report, I don't know. I guess you guys forgot that the whole reason the FBI was created was to apprehend, curtail, and surveil leftists like Martin Luther King. I guess you guys forgot that. But let me just remind you, as a leftist, the FBI was that was their whole goal, guys. Remember the McCarthyism? Remember that? Going after the communists. So a lot of people are saying Putin wants to reignite the Soviet Union, even though he's not a communist. I don't really know what Putin wants, but I do know what Joe Biden wants. It's what he's always wanted. Money, power and influence. He said in a speech at the business CEO meeting that we need to be part of the New World Order. We need to lead the New World Order. He said to Nicolas Maduro that his sanctions are lifted, despite whatever the reason the sanctions were for in the first place, if he ships oil directly to the United States. But now, for God's sake, man, look fat. Look, buddy, he done some push-ups. This Putin guy can't be in power anymore. Joe Biden now thinks that the Russian people need to bend to his will as well. Well, Joe's been getting the same answer over and over and over again throughout his entire administration. Although he's so dementia-riddled, I don't really know if he understands this. Let me see if I can translate it. Let's go, Brandon. Let's go, Brandon, guys. By the way, I'm not supporting Putin in any way. I don't give a shit about Putin. Don't like Putin. Don't particularly care about Putin at all. But it's just funny to see this little counterpart stance between leader and leader. How they're so afraid of Putin, he might default on his debt because he's not bought by Russian oligarchs, like Joe Biden's bought by American oligarchs. How our propaganda falls apart. The first meaningful NATO shut the fuck up goes. You know what I'm saying? Guys, even NATO can smell what we're cooking. We're cooking chemical weapons. We're cooking false coups. We're cooking misinformation and disinformation. All the things that Joe Biden said hurt democracy, he's practicing with his deep state cronies. And if you don't believe me, guys, then believe Bernie Sanders.
I voted against the war in Iraq because I listened very carefully to what President Bush and Vice President Cheney had to say, and I didn't believe them. And if you go to my website, berniesanders.com, what you find is not only that I helped lead the opposition to that war, but much of what I feared would happen, what I spoke on the floor of the House, in fact, did happen in terms of the instability that occurred. Now, I think an area in kind of a vague way, or not so vague, where Secretary Clinton and I disagree, is the area of regime change. Look, the truth is that a powerful nation like the United States, certainly working with our allies, we can overthrow dictators all over the world. And God only knows Saddam Hussein was a brutal dictator. We could overthrow Assad tomorrow if we wanted to. We got rid of Gaddafi. But the point about foreign policy is not just to know that you can overthrow a terrible dictator. It's to understand what happens the day after. And in Libya, for example, the United States, Secretary Clinton, as Secretary of State, working with some other countries, did get rid of a terrible dictator named Gaddafi. But what happened is a political vacuum developed. ISIS came in and now occupies significant territory in Libya and is now prepared, unless we stop them, to have a terrorist foothold. But this is nothing new. This has gone on 50 or 60 years, where the United States has been involved in overthrowing governments. Mossadegh back in 1953. Nobody knows who Mossadegh was. Democratically elected Prime Minister of Iran. He was overthrown by British and American interest because he threatened oil interest of the British. And as a result of that, the Shah of Iran came in, terrible dictator. As a result of that, you had the Iranian Revolution coming in, and that's where we are today. Unintended consequences. So I believe, as president, I will look very carefully.
Unintended consequences. Unprepared remarks. I think I'm just going to leave it there. Y'all be free-thinking, innovative, and totally open-minded. If you say you're left, just remind yourself what left is, guys. Remind yourself you're anti-war, you're pro-choice, you're big on empathy. You don't like a concentrated corporate power and their wealthy lobbyist interests. You don't like that. If you say you're left, just do me a fat favor too. While you're being free-thinking, innovative, and open-minded, guys. This is